Today I'm going to be re-ranking every of Pokemon's most popular formats, or rather at least the ones that I know. This is of course on the second channel, so it's going to be unedited, unfiltered, and I'm just going to kind of talk about these again. Wanted to do this as an article, but it didn't really work as an article. That would take forever to write. Can't really do it on the main channel because the main channel is edited scripted videos, and this is a giant tier list, and I don't do tier list videos anymore. Except for, of course, right now. Now, if anyone hasn't seen this before, I have made a tier maker with most of Pokemon's played alternative formats to standard format on here. Some of them are not played as often, some of them are played as often, and I have kind of just a representative card put behind text for each format. So for instance, the team-up format is undeniably kind of ruled by lightning decks like Pikarom and Jolteon, so I chose Pikarom as the mascot. I could have also chose Zapdos, but I felt like having these three being tag team Pokemon that came out in their respective sets was a pretty good way to do it. Now there are some Japanese formats I won't be ranking. There's a lot of like random niche Japanese formats that don't actually have much of a player base in the West. There's a couple of people like JP, for instance, if you know him, who play these formats. However, they are not popular enough to justify adding to this tier list. There's also random, like there's people who have like Ancient Origins standard built for whatever reason, and that is not on here. So I chose ones that I've seen multiple people have built or myself built. Sometimes they're notable formats in history, such as like no one really has Majestic Dawn of Black and White built, but it is like a notable historical format. We're going to add an extra tier onto the tier list just because there are some that I have not played or have no opinion of. Of course, this is trying to fix the fact that last time I did a tier list like this, it was much less complete. This was about 2 years ago, last time I did a video tier list ranking the formats. So there are a couple that I still have not played. Slowly working on getting to all of the formats, but I have not played 2002 Worlds, the official 2002 Worlds format, nor have I played Neo SK. Both of these formats do look cool. I've not played base set only or the degenerate base formats because these formats are just kind of unplayable formats. People really, I mean, I was going to say people don't play them. People do on TCG 1, but realistically, no one should play these formats. Just play base Fossil or play some kind of like Prop 15-3, you know, point system so you can actually enjoy these formats. Starting off then with base Fossil. Base Fossil is like probably in the D tier. I would probably play it in F if I was just being honest with the meta. But there is some cool base Fossil decks. The gameplay does have uniqueness to it. Every once in a while I get the urge to play a game of base Fossil. For anyone who doesn't know, originally base Fossil was based entirely around fast basic decks versus Blastoise. Back in the historical days, a lot of badly built lists, of course, because back then the game was just starting. But decks like Haymaker, which is just a big basic box, kind of shone through. And while Haymaker style decks with just a bunch of big basics are still good, the best decks in the format nowadays are Lickitung. If you were to rank the top 10 decks in base Fossil, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe even 5 are going to be different Lickitung variants that are like 5 cards to 10 cards apart from each other. Not including the energy type, because energies are interchangeable realistically. Just, this is Lickitung Psychic, and here are 5 different attackers that you swapped out. Here's Lickitung Fire, and there's 5 different guys you swapped out. Here's Lickitung Fire and Psychic, with 5 different guys you swapped out. Here's Lickitung Grass, with just a bunch of Scythers. You know, Lickitung is essentially aiming to deck the opponent out. There is no way to reliably put resources back into your deck other than very gimmicky ways such as Fuji, which shuffles one of your Pokemon into your deck, so just attach a bunch of cards, try to shuffle a Pokemon in to try to not deck out. And there's Gambler, flip a coin if heads, shuffle draw 8, if tails, shuffle draw 1 as a trainer card, and you actually want to get the shuffle draw 1 so that you don't deck out. Base Fossil is a format where if you take your mulligans you might just lose the game. It's super unbalanced, but there is a lot of skill in the gameplay of base Fossil. Whether that skill is fun or not really, but it does exist, and I think it's worth highlighting. I think it's a format that's worth playing at least once. I played a tournament in this format. I regret playing a tournament in this format, but it exists. It's something. Moving on to base Neo, I have not played no-ban base Neo. I've watched other people play it, but realistically, no-ban base Neo is a very unplayable format. It would no doubt end up in the F tier. Slowking is the ban in question here, where Slowking was mistranslated in English, allowing it to work anywhere on your board instead of just in your active spot. And what the ability does is that your opponent has to flip to play a trainer card. So instead of having a really bad Pokemon in the active spot and your opponent having to flip 1 coin to use their trainer card, instead they will have to flip 4 coins, as you can put a good Pokemon in the active spot and put 4 Slowking on your bench. Now realistically that's kind of a pipe dream setup, but these decks are very good at stalling out the opponent by trapping them infinitely, and essentially preventing them from playing any trainer cards to escape traps. Definitely would be an unplayable format, no doubt would be in the F tier. But I have played base Neo with bans. I've only got 3 decks for it. I've played 1 or 2 other ones online. Base Neo is also like a D tier format. It's worse than base Fossil in that it is undoubtedly a less like competitive metagame, right? The format's more toxic, it's more swingy. You'll see like 3 prize turns just come out of nowhere when you're playing against like Sneasel Crobat. You will sometimes just not get to have a hand the entire game, even with Cleffa in the format to refresh players' hands to 7 cards, which is a nice little addition that came on to the format after the gym era. We get Cleffa, which is a great addition. However, you get the Sneasel decks, which can still use Lass 7 times a game and just rip your hand every time you get a new one, knock out 2 Pokemon in a turn, and then just basically shut you out of the game. But it's fun every once in a while. Very sacky format, not very fun to play. Kingdra's a cool deck, Sneasel Bats is a cool deck. It's kind of just a format that you're just playing to play it for fun. If you take it seriously, you're just going to be miserable because it's not very skill-based. You know, yes, there's skillful discards, interactions, stuff like that, but you can also just get turn 1 last and lose. So for that sake, just don't play it with the expectation of having fun. You're just playing it for the silliness of it, and that's what it be. Next up, we have Rocket On. This could be 2002 Rocket On, I forget. I think 2002 was the year that Rocket On is played in the competitive circuit. We did, of course, have all of the sets for Neo by the time 2001, I believe, ended. But I could be wrong on that. But what essentially Rocket On does is it removes base set through Fossil from the format. Base set through Fossil contains all of the most toxic and unbalanced trainer cards around. Some of them were reprinted, like I believe Lass was reprinted, as well as we got back the Pokemon Trader, and I believe we got back Scoop Up. But the biggest difference with Rocket On is that you can attach multiple energy to your Pokemon to attack, because in these prior formats, there's a lot of energy removal cards. It's really hard to power up Stage 2s and attach multiple energy unless you're playing something like Blastoise that can just attach as many water energy from your hand during your turn as you like. So attackers like this Feraligatr here were not very good in base Neo. You did have Dark Feraligatr just to shut opponents out of the game, but stuff like this Neo Feraligatr, regular Feraligatr, just not that good in the base Neo format, whereas in Rocket On, you know, we solved one problem in creating a new format where you can play different kinds of Stage 2s. You know, the meta's made of all different kinds of, like, Crobat, Feraligatr, Dark Gengar, stuff like that. But in the process, Feraligatr ended up being a tier 0 deck on the same level as, like, 2008 Gardevoir and stuff like that. If you look at the historical results, it's just utterly dominated by Riptide Feraligatr. But the format is actually fun. That's the biggest difference between the base Fossil, base Neo, and Rocket On formats. Rocket On is exceedingly fun, and it's one of my favorite formats. Despite the fact that it's unbalanced, I think of it as a format where if you play competitively, you are missing the point. There's cards like Chaos Gym that are completely unbalanced. You probably just shouldn't even play with it legal. There's decks like Steelix with Muck, where your opponent is just going to do nothing the entire game. Their only win con is going to be Deck Out after some point, and is that really exciting? Not really. So there's things in the format that are absolutely flaws, but it's also one of the most fun Pokemon playing experiences you can have in the Pokemon TCG. So for that, I'm going to give it A tier. This is obviously not take this as like I enjoy playing this format, not that it's like a competitively like the best format of all time. If you play it with like a Chaos Gym loop deck, if you get Sander, Wojcik, or Tfue in this format, they're going to brew up a deck that makes you go outside and tell yourself about the rabbits out behind the barn. But if you just play for Alligator versus like Machamp and Kingdra and Dark Gengar and all these other Crobats, Ampharos, all these fun decks. A lot of people forget how to have fun in Retro. The format is absolutely fun. Moving down, speaking of fun formats, we have E-Card. I'm going to talk about Prop 15 and E-Card before I get to the EX era formats, because these are Watsi formats. Might as well just get through them. For Prop 15.3, I have very complicated feelings about Prop 15.3. I played in a tournament with Prop 15.3 somewhere around 2 years ago for the EX Brawl, and it was just utter slop, honestly. That's why I call it Slop 15.3. The format runs into a problem of inconsistency. Players of Prop 15.3 will say that my experiences were one of a kind, that I'm the only person who experiences this. But when I played the format, all of my games were either like I completely 5-0 my opponent or they completely 6-0 me. And in the games I was winning where I was 5-0ing my opponent, it wasn't that my opponent was taking a knockout on my Pokemon, it's that my Rocket Zapdos was killing itself with a recoil, and that would be the only prize card the opponent got. Essentially, Prop 15.3 was an alternate rule set because base gym was such a toxic, unplayable format. Prop 15.3 came around and said that players can only play 15 trainers in their deck and a limit of 3 cards, 3 copies of each card. Well, this sounds cool. It does allow some Stage 2s to see play that otherwise wouldn't, most notably the Dark Dragonair, Dark Dragonite line. I think is probably the most interesting thing in the format that it has. What it also causes is some very linear gameplay and also a lot of bricks. When you only have 15 trainers in your deck, the person who gets to use the first computer search or Oak or Item Finder in a valuable spot is going to have a huge advantage. There's not a lot of hand disruption in the format that's being played, so you're just going to kind of have a pretty bad time if one player gets set up and the other doesn't. Now, the format does have things to alleviate that. We have things like the Kangaskhan to draw a card, but even with that, I still got a lot of games where I just got donked. Like, I had 2 Kangaskhan in my deck, and there's games where I would start Kangaskhan, use Collect to draw a card like 5 times, and get donked by just an attacker doing 20 damage. Because this format of base era does have a lot of attackers that are pretty efficient. And the other problem that Prop 15.3 has that I have seen is that you get a lot of just good cards that are going to be played in every deck. Now, this is, of course, what are you saying, Mr. Whimscast? 4 Stevens, 4 Copycat, most 04 decks, right? Every format has good cards. What I mean about that is the Pokemon. Because the Pokemon are so unlimited in the deck compared to the trainer cards, you get an interesting kind of dilemma where the Pokemon replace the value of the trainer cards. So Pokemon like Dodrio that give your Pokemon less retreat replace the value of cards like Scoop Up and Switch, which would otherwise move your Pokemon in and out of the active spot. So decks play a lot of these good card TM Pokemon that are just going to show up in about 50% of lists. So like most lists are going to have things like Dodrio or Wigglytuff in there. You're going to see a lot of the same attackers, especially the colorless ones, that can fit in multiple decks. And I think ultimately if I just kept playing the format even past my tournament experience, I don't think my opinion of it would improve. It's something where maybe it'd be fun casually. I'm going to give it F tier though. Moving on to E-Card Block. E-Card Block surprised me, not because I think it is some super revolutionary format, but because I think it is at least interesting. I'll probably change this image post-uploading because Typhlosion is not that good of a deck in E-Card. For my experience in E-Card, I've played about half of my proxy decks, and then I've played a little bit online as well. So I've seen, the talents of Kingdra, Gengar, Charizard, Scizor, and I have a Tyranitar control deck. The format of E-Card, the gameplay is actually very satisfying. It is a very simple format. Most decks are going to be playing the same trainer cards for the most part. Every single deck's going to be running like 4 Fan Club for the most part. Every single deck's going to be running like 4 Oaks Research for the most part. You do see a little bit of diversity in the trainer lines when you get to stuff like my Tyranitar control deck, and then the trainer lines of decks that are playing like aggro stage 1 like Scissor are going to run a lot different, a lot more item cards than decks like Kingdra, which are like slower stage 2, I want to build a board kind of decks. So you get some variety there. I do think the gameplay can be linear. Decks can also be bricky, so because there are not that powerful supporter cards, the 2 supporter cards as mentioned that are in every deck are search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and bench them, and shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5. These are like 2 supporter cards that most other formats you would not play. They are very good in e-card block. So the format can be inconsistent, it can be a bit sacky. There's a lot of coin flip effects on cards, just like Rocketon. Rocketon is the coin flip lovers format. But despite that, e-card block has satisfying gameplay. It's very fun in a casual setting. I've had a lot of fun with e-card. I would put it in B. If you don't like e-card because you think sometimes, you know, the games can be a little matchup based, that would absolutely be true. One of the things I've noticed is that weakness plays way too big of a role in e-card. Where if you have a weakness, it's very hard to overcome a weakness matchup, whereas if you have a resistance, it is almost impossible to lose to a resistance matchup, because E-card lowered the damage on cards significantly, so if I played against a Psychic deck with my Tyranitar control deck, they can just not damage me at all, basically, because they're doing minus 30 damage with the resistance, and their best attack in the deck might do 30 or 40 damage. So you do get a bit of that problem. As a competitive metagame, it's not the best. As a casual format, it is great, and I've enjoyed playing it. I believe that is all the Watsi formats out of the way. We don't need to talk about any of the other Watsi stuff. Moving on to 2004. 2004 I have a bit of complicated feelings about. It's kind of a vibes format, more than anything else. The gameplay can be very sacky at times, especially against the big basic decks and Gorbis. If they just get out of the gate going really quickly, you might just lose to that. If your opponent starts a Dunsparce and gets a very good setup, it can be very hard to make comebacks in this format because there's not a lot of ways to build your board that can survive things like, let's just say, a Blaziken EX. So if a Blaziken EX deck, you're playing against it, and they just get a very, very good setup, and you do not, the game is probably over. Despite that, 2004 has some very fun games. I really like Magma, I really like Blaziken, Gardevoir is pretty fun, Exploud is pretty fun. There are some cock and ball torture decks. You have, your Cradilly deck, you have things that are pretty awful, but the main problem I'd say with modern 04 is just the Gorbis decks. If you've played against Gorbis, I call it, instead of its attack being a psychic base attack, I say it is just the predecessor of Roaring Moon EX, because if you click that attack on turn 7 onwards, you are taking a one-hit KO. Even against Pokemon with 120 HP, Gorbis will just kill it in a single hit. It does not matter. You could print a Pokemon with 300 HP and Gorbis would still be one-hit KOing at 04, just because Gorbis is the most overpowered card in the format. Free retreat, insanely good basic, access to all of the cards that the EXs cannot use, while also taking advantage of all the cards that evolutions get to use. Having 2 of the best attacks, having the best typing, Gorbis does it all. And in the context of Gorbis being extremely bad for the metagame, I can't rank like 04 as like an S tier format because I despise playing against Gorbis decks. I don't think they're fun to play against. Having to build every Blaziken deck with like 4 different counters to Gorbis is not exactly my favorite thing in the world. 04 can also be sacky, again, the setups. So with that in mind, I can't put it in A tier, but I can't put it anywhere below B tier. With I'm not ranking these tiers, by the way, based on like where they are. It's not like, okay, 04 is better than E-card block. I'm going to put it right here. I'm just going to do it chronologically. I do think 04 is really fun. I love playing 04 casually, but 04 as a competitive format does disappoint me a bit. Going on to 05, I have played a little bit more 05 since last time, so I'm comfortable ranking it now. Last time I had created this tier list, I really hadn't touched 05. I've played a decent bit of it now. I own the 4 Worlds decks, and I've played a little bit online as well, experimenting with some other things. The main thing about 05 is that it is kind of it's the perfect middle format between 2006 and 2004. Because 2004, you have all these decks setting up with Dunsparce, having really inconsistent setups, and kind of just, you know, you're having a lot of like kind of sacky games. 06 decks are super consistent. You have the Holon engine, and you have these very powerful Pokemon. 05, you have these very powerful Pokemon, but the decks are inconsistent. So you have decks setting up with things like Dunsparce. Jirachi was probably underused in that format. Is it legal? I don't even know if Jirachi's legal. I don't think Jirachi's legal, actually. I could be wrong on that, though. It is legal. It is illegal. Yep, Jirachi is legal. It's in all the quad decks. And I'll talk about that in a second. 05 has cards that are really good in 06, like the Dark Tyranitar, the Dragtrode stuff, Nidoqueen, these decks that are really iconic from 06. And they're kind of like in these weird nerfed versions in 05 where you're playing things like Dunsparce to set up, and you're using Stevens and Copycat instead of the Holon engine. I like that you get to use supporters that aren't the Holon engine because it gives games a little bit more replayability. The Holon engine does very much feel like sometimes hard to disrupt your opponent because they can just Scientist draw 10 if you ever try to hand disrupt them. And you also get a very flawless setup each time. But then again, 2005 does a lot of sacky setups. The other thing that really defines 05, other than Nidoqueen and Medicham being like the top two like most popular decks nowadays, is the use of the quad decks. You don't really see this in 06. Stuff like LBS that came out that could just one-shot these quad decks kind of makes them less popular. You see Arcanine being a quad deck in 06. That's kind of a similar thing. But 05 is absolutely filled with quad decks. And what they do is they start with Jirachi, and they use Jirachi as a setup piece. You look at the top 5. If Jirachi's in the active, you could get to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, keep one of them, and then Jirachi goes to sleep. And the goal is just that you use Jirachi until you're set up and ready to use your quad attacker, and then you swoop Teleporter, which switches Jirachi for another basic Pokemon in the deck, into your basic, evolve straight to your, quad attacking stage 1, and just start slamming. This is Dark Steelix, that's a quad deck. This is Hariyama, this is Medicham, this is Sharpedo. There are tons of different quad decks that follow this exact same formula, and I think they're an interesting part of the format. I like Hariyama. It's a Pokemon that I'm very fond of that doesn't get good cards, so getting to play Hariyama EX as a meta-viable deck has some charm to it. With that, though, I don't think 05 is a great format. It's just fine. I would put it as C tier. I would have a hard time playing this format for like a tournament, but sure, I'll play it for fun. Why not? The quad decks are very sacky, though. They run a lot of trainer cards, coin flip cards, stuff like that can make people mad. 2006, on the other hand, very, very fun format, very consistent. One of the things that we get into with these EX era formats, 2005 and 2006, is this is the era of POW hand extension. I could say it's the era of things like LBS as well, but really the most single defining card from the EX era to me is POW hand extension. It's easily the most unbalanced card printed in the era, and I feel like eventually every single format that has POW hand extension legal will follow the same loop of eventually the format revolves around decks that abuse POW hand extension and decks that survive POW hand extension, right? I didn't say thrive with POW hand extension, decks that survive it, right? Things like Gardevoir in the RSBK format are decks that can survive POW hand extension due to them having an energy moving effect built into their deck, so you can't just infinitely loop them. POW hand extension will be on screen, hopefully, when I do this, but if not, POW hand extension is a card where if you are behind, it is essentially counter catcher, or you can choose to move an energy off your opponent's active. It is the strongest control card printed in the Gen 3, Gen 4 era. Of the modern era, anywhere from Generation 3 to now, I rank it as the second strongest control card after Oranguru. And even Oranguru might be worse than POW, just because POW is a trainer card versus a Pokemon that has to pay an energy to attack. But Oranguru, of course, is banned in the expanded format, gives a little bit more credence to why something like that is so powerful. And essentially, if you play 06, it does have a bit of a problem competitively of Bombtar being the undisputed best deck. Now, this doesn't mean Bombtar is unbeatable. It doesn't have Cessation Crystal in this format, so it is not as sacky as RSPK Bombtar. but it is definitely disgusting. It's not very fun to play against. Bomb Tar is one of those decks where they are solitairing their own board. What you are doing does not really matter. It doesn't have really any terrible matchups. It's just, I'm going to build my board, and you either win or lose based on how the POW hand extensions and Rockets admins end up, because they're going to put you behind on prizes, and you're going to lose. If you just brick a single time, if you whiff for a single moment, make a single misplay, the game's over. Despite that, though, 2006 has LBS, a very fun deck with lots of different attackers, a very interesting approach to playing a ton of one-ofs and hyper-aggressive strategies like Drag Troder around. You have very cool disruptive strategies like Flariados in the format that are very cool. You have stuff from 05 like Nidoqueen is still very good. You have some more simple decks like Arcanine in the format. 2006 is a very diverse format. I believe the last 06 tournament had like 13 different decks out of 16 players, and it was won by a Fossil Box, which is unbelievable that actually won a tournament. It is a deck in another format like RSPK, but it's never actually, I don't think, gotten a good tournament result, whereas this is like random 06 tournament and Riley Wren wins with a Fossil Box. Pretty cool. 06 has got a lot of iconic decks as well, things like Ryeeggs, things like Ludicargo. Ludicargo also in 05, but in 06 I think it gets a little bit more cool, even if it's a little less powerful. Very fun format to play. Again, competitively, there is the POW hand extension problem. You have Bomb Tar and you have Mulock. These are two decks that just all they want to do is POW you. And when they do, you kind of just lose, especially with Mulock based on matchups. If you're just playing a bad matchup in the Mulock like LBS, you might just lose the game, just based on matchup alone. But if I'm going to play an EX era format, I want to play 06. It is my favorite of the EX era formats. Speaking of EX era formats, we'll talk about RSPK, which is down here. This is the last of the fully EX era ingrained formats. And I'm probably very controversial in the fact that I do not like RSPK. RSPK is arguably the most popular retro format these days, competing with 2010. 2010 forever was the most popular. Nowadays, RSPK seems to kind of have surpassed it just because of the push. RSPK is strange in that most people can't afford to build RSPK decks, so it's mostly played just online. But it is very popular with online tournaments happening. Tournaments in Japan happen with over 100 people with RSPK, which is where a lot of its popularity is focused. We do have, of course, RSPK tournaments happening internationally, but they're definitely much smaller. And part of that is, again, that cost issue with buying decks that cost as much as a kidney. You could buy a new car for less than some of the decks in this format. The same problem happens with 06 as well, with things like LBS. But I don't find the gameplay of RSPK very fun. One of the things that's a big difference between RSPK and 06 is cards like POW Hand Extension, cards like Cessation Crystal. Cessation Crystal, a new card to the format that ability locks your opponent if it's attached to your active Pokemon that's not a EX. Very unfun card, not really fun to play against in any of the formats it's in. And it's a star card in RSPK. What I'm trying to say with the biggest difference between 06 and RSPK isn't that cards like POW Hand Extension is good, it's rather the choices of decks that people choose to play. People choose to go to an 06 tournament with 13 different archetypes and play really fun strategies that make for really awesome games. And people choose to go to an RSPK tournament with a ton of lock decks focused on looping POW Hand Extension, denying your opponent the ability to play the games. And due to that, things like Bomb Tar, you will get very sacky, unfun games. I have played an RSPK tournament before. A lot of my losses were just I don't set up against my opponent and they just run me off of the board because they get a solid setup and I don't. A lot of the games were not very interactive, and I lost a game round 1 against an opponent playing Railer, who just flipped a ton of heads. You can play that deck very badly, but then just fix your misplays by flipping all of your Super Scoop Ups and ER2's heads and just removing all your opponent's energy. Obviously, top level tournament, you won't see that pan out well for them because I rematched them day 2 and their coins didn't go their way and they get absolutely destroyed by a deck like Ryeeggs. But I just don't find the format fun. None of the top decks are fun to play against. Things like Sceptile AX, not fun to play against. Things like Cessation Crystal, not fun to play against. So I haven't enjoyed what I've played of the format, and I don't want to play more of it. I'm one of the few people who will stand on the hill of hating RSBK. It's not the least playable format ever. It's not like, it's certainly no like Prop 15-3. It's definitely more balanced than the Watsi formats, right? Like balance-wise, it is definitely more balanced than the Watsi formats. I just think that if I were to name the top 10 decks in RSPK, not a single one of them would be a deck I want to play a game against. Maybe Flygon. Flygon seems like a balanced, just kind of beat stick. Like, it's fine. It's like inoffensive, right? Though it's way less cool than its 07 counterpart. We'll talk about 07 in a second. RSBK, we'll throw it into the D tier. Going chronologically, we'll put it at the end. Speaking of 07, 07's a format that surprised me. It gets a lot of flack. It is a format that does not have hand disruption. It does not have, Rockets, Admin, Judge, Iono, these kind of cards that people write in to formats kind of just expecting them to have. They expect there to be some kind of hand disruption. They expect there to be some kind of good recovery card. They're expected there to be comeback mechanics. But despite this, I find myself enjoying 07 more than most people. And it's because 07 just has a lot of interesting and fun decks to play. It's this kind of thing of there are some unfun decks, but they're not too strong. Like Empoleon is definitely the least fun deck in the format, and it is definitely a A-tier strategy, but it's definitely not unbeatable. Many of the best decks answer Empoleon pretty well. Probably the worst thing about 07 for me is just a lack of good recovery cards. Having to use Hole on Farmer is interesting, but not fun. I wish there was something like Pokémon Retriever or like Night Maintenance, which we are one set off of getting. 07 would be a very different format if we had one more Diamond and Pearl era set added in, which would give hand disruption and give Night Maintenance. But I think 07 has a lot of charm. You get these very intricate, like toolbox style EX era decks filled with things like Absol EX, Jolteon EX, Shiftry EX, Flygon EX, all these Delta attackers like Executor, all these interesting cards. And then you get these very straightforward Diamond and Pearl decks. These are the simplest of the Diamond and Pearl era cards at the very beginning. So they're very much like attack style decks. And this is one of my favorite dynamics, I think, in Pokemon, is when you get a mix of powerful, simple cards mixed with, more complex, weaker cards. I'm the type of person who's usually going to play the more complex, weaker cards because I enjoy playing a complex strategy and being able to do multiple things. But a lot of players prefer playing a strong card, and that feels like it gives a lot of value to both sides. It's not a format where you can only play a complex deck, or it's not a format like, for instance, let's just say 2013, where you can only play simple decks. You get kind of a mix in there of having these complex, strong decks versus like these, or a complex, weaker number decks versus these DP era cards, these simple, big number guy decks. But all the DP era decks are pretty fun to play, spare Empoleon. Competitively, 07 is a bit hit or miss. It does have Cessation Crystal, which is a bummer, but I do really like the evolutions, and I like playing the decks with the evolutions. I like the interactions that come from things like Speed Spread and Shift Tree. I enjoy playing Rhyperior Mill, even if people do not like playing against it. I think the format has a lot of fun to offer. It's not a great competitive format, but I would absolutely bring it to, my locals to have fun. 2008, on the other hand, is a little bit worse. 2008 suffers from kind of being a 3-deck format of Gardevoir, Empoleon, and then like Cessation decks, right? So you have Gardevoir, who was like the BDIF the entire year, at least, of course, in our Western formats. Gardevoir just absolutely broken ever since it came out. Since you have access to things like Double Rainbow and Scramble Energy, you can pay for its Psychic Lock attack. super easily, potentially launching turn 2 permanent power locks that the opponent never breaks through. And then you, later on, by the time Worlds comes out, you get some of the more powerful cards from Majestic Dawn from the Diamond and Pearl era. They're not the most powerful, you're not yet getting to like Stormfront power creep levels, but you're getting things like Empoleon from Majestic Dawn, much more powerful than Diamond and Pearl Empoleon. You get things like Bronzong, these very efficient attackers in Majestic Dawn. But you also get some stuff that's pretty gross, like you get the Glaceon, which is just a power lock deck again. And so you can build a Cessation Crystal deck around that. And 2008 is definitely the format where Cessation Crystal feels the worst, because decks are a lot of times just using Absol, which mills a random card from the opponent's hand with Cessation Crystal to try to just prevent the opponent from getting a good setup and then just run through a torn up board. And this is so effective because Absol discards a random card from your opponent's hand, but if you hit a trainer card, you get to discard another random card from the opponent's hand. Now this is, you can't do it like multiple times, so you can't just go like trainer, keep discarding. But discarding 2 cards from the opponent's hand is absolutely brutal. There's not a lot of agency to it. In the case of, RSPK Stantler decks, there's at least like a little bit of agency to it. It costs 2 energy to use, and you only get to pick 1 trainer, but you have to pick it, so you have to pick right. There's some skill to that. Absol's very random. I enjoy grinding 08 games because I think they are fun at times. I think a lot of the decks are very, very fun. I really, really like Ampharos Bronzong. Bronzong in general, just one of my favorite cards of all time. And getting to play it is a joy. I really like Magmortar, not a top contender in 08 Worlds format, but it is a very cool card. And I think Empoleon's pretty cool, even if it is very, very overpowered. It is very cool, fun to play. So with that, 08 kind of gets this balance of being fun to play, but being very competitively kind of bankrupt. And for that, I do have to give it D tier as a format. I would not bring it to locals often because you're going to get a lot of games where your opponent just gets completely locked out of the game. But you can also get some of the best games Pokemon has to offer. I guess RSPK would be similar in that way, where you have some of the most toxic cards in Pokemon history in RSPK, but you can also get some very, very good games. 08 RSPK similar. The RSPK fans are going to be livid that I said that. Next up, you have 2008 Cities. So this is Diamond and Pearl to Stormfront. I've written an article about this format because I thought it was quite interesting. I'm trying to look if there's any other ones. There's not. So this is essentially Diamond and Pearl block. There's no, none of the Pokemon SP, none of the Platinum era stuff. It is just Diamond and Pearl cards competing against other Diamond and Pearl cards. What does actually happen here is that Legends Awakened and Stormfront, continuing along with 2008 Worlds, where Majestic Dawn was a huge power creep set, you get the same thing with Legends Awakened and Stormfront. These are 2 huge power creep sets. You get stuff like Kingdra, you get Dusknoir, you get Gengar, Machamp, Magnezone level X with Magnezone Stormfront, Tyranitar from Stormfront. You get all of these cards, which are huge power creep cards. Diamond and Pearl definitely ramped up its ante in its second half of the block, right? Majestic Dawn, Legends Awakened, Stormfront. Each of these sets is just huge power creep, but the cards are awesome. You have cards like Tyranitar from Stormfront, one of my all-time favorite cards, and you can play that against things like Stormfront Gengar. And Stormfront Gengar, a lot of people hate that card, but in this format, not only is it super broken, it's like tier 0 almost until you realize that it loses to stuff like Tyranitar, so you have this balance in place now. You have really broken stuff like turn 1 Kingdra, which seems really broken, but then it loses to Gengar because Gengar item locks you on turn 1. You have, really, really cool spread decks like Abomasnow, Bronzong that only get to exist in this format. You have this very weird scenario in this format where Cresselia level X is like the single best utility piece you can add to your deck, and if you can fit Cresselia level X, your deck is broken, and if you can fit 2 Cresselia level X in your deck, like a 2-2 line, it's even more broken. Cresselia essentially creates the Monkey Dory Wars of 2025 in a Diamond and Pearl era format because it's that good of a card. There's not a lot of one-shots going around. There's a ton of damage spread. Very intricate gameplay, despite the fact that the card pool is small and there's very few options for supporter line deck building. A lot of decks end up playing just item booster consistency cards like Poké Draw or Poké decks that just mill through your own deck just to set up. But the gameplay is very, very intricate at times, which makes it very fun to play. And I get to use a lot of my favorite cards. So because of this, I would absolutely put it in B tier, because flawed again competitively, Stormfront Gengar is a little too good in this metagame. And you have to build your deck with like 5 separate counters in the deck just to play against it sometimes if you are a power reliant deck. But it is a very fun format to play, and I'm a big fan of it. Next up we have 2009, again another very competitively centralized power crept format. In 2009 you get the earliest Pokemon SP, you get the Dialga, Palkia, the Toxic Tank stuff, and then you also get Luxray. And Luxray is a huge addition to the card pool, of course. Being able to gust your opponent, boss's orders effect on an ability is very, very good. So the format ends up revolving around a lot around SP, and then the other half of the format is these really, really slow Flygon decks that are just unbreakable. Like killing a Flygon with your Pokemon is like arduous if you don't have a card to hit weakness in your deck, because at this point there's no Garchomp C, no like reliable colorless SP Pokemon that can just hit Flygon hard. Killing a Flygon can take you like 3 or 4 attacks if it's got a healing Nidoqueen on its board. You also get Nidoqueen, which turns cards like Tyranitar Stormfront kind of belly up because they can't deal with the fact that your spread attack does nothing, so you kind of just have to one-shot things now, kind of boring. But essentially you get these like very flawed SP decks that are very fun to play, and then you have these very fun to play slow, bulky Flygon decks. 2009 has a lot of skill to it, however it's also very sacky. Setups can vary differently. You don't have Spiritomb from Arceus in this format, which means that my opponent's deck might just get set up very well, and I don't, because without Spiritomb, setups are less consistent, especially against SP. SP can just do something like chain 4 Power Sprays against you, since there's nothing that you can do to block Power Spray from being played. And if they just block your powers for 4 turns while you're setting up, you might just lose the game to not setting up. Despite that, I think 2009 is very fun. It's a format I enjoy playing a lot. Not a lot of other people enjoy playing it, but I am always down for 09. I think it's very fun to play, and I would absolutely play it with people. It's a very interesting point in the metagame. You have this interesting point where Flygon is absolutely incredible because there's no Garchomp, and this interesting point where you have the early SP decks. Things like Palkia Lock are good, and things like Luxape instead of like Lux Chomp. You have these aggressive SP decks that are based around Infernape level X of all things, right? Interesting format, lots of fun games to be had. Kind of sacky, fun though. Then you have 2009 cities. So this is Diamond and Pearl Arceus. So the entire Diamond and Pearl block is in this format. This was actually, unlike the other blocks, this was a format that was played historically. RSPK was kind of played historically in Japan, not really though. There's like the entire Power Keeper set is essentially missing from that format. But historically, during Diamond and Pearl, they skipped rotation in 2009 after the World Championships and let the Diamond and Pearl first 4 sets stay in the format, which means you did get infected Diamond and Pearl block. You never got a full Gen 4 block in English, thank God, but you did get Diamond and Pearl block. To me, this format has always felt like 2010 light. I've played only a little bit of it. I haven't particularly been fond of it. It's got a lot of cool cards in it, but it's one of those formats where I don't really have a strong opinion on it. It's just I would never choose to play it over 2010. Unlike 2009, there is Garchomp, there is Spiritomb, you have Expert Belt. Most of the 2010 decks are there in DPAR for the most part. You know, you miss out on like Donphan Prime, Kingdra Prime, Flyterra, stuff like that. But you have most of the 2010 decks just operating at like a kind of handicapped level where supporter options, no DCE means the format is a bit slower, but that also means that Gengar and Dialga are much stronger since they're less reliant on DCE than things like Lux Chomp and Gardevoir and Flygon. So you get this interesting metagame. I don't really have like a negative opinion of it. I don't really have a positive opinion of it. I would never play it over 2010 though. As for 2010, we're going to go with 2010 S tier. Anyone who knows me is not surprised to hear this, that 2010 is my favorite format. 2010 is an aggressive format. Unlike 09 and DPAR, you do see a little bit more aggression in 2010. You see things like Jumpluff and the Pokemon Prime, which can run you off the board sometimes and make a skill diff, as the good ones say, to just completely and utterly run you off the board with just a fast, aggressive assault. SP is famous for this. That's why Luxchomp, despite not being the single, GOAT deck it was once thought to be, Luxchomp is still incredible because it's able to quickly set up against you and take a lot of prize cards early in the game if it is drawing well, if it's not getting stopped. But in that same regard, you have good countermeasures in this format. Things like Spiritomb's item lock, like Judge, which is strong hand disruption, like Trainer Lock, like Power Lock. You have all kinds of counters for Luxchomp, and sometimes Luxchomp just loses if you just hand disrupt them and knock them out. It doesn't take that much to beat Luxchomp, but at the same time, it also takes a lot to beat Luxchomp, if that makes sense. They can fall into pieces under themselves, but they can also completely overwhelm you. Despite that, 2010 is one of the most fun formats ever. Like, I really, really like it. I think that 2010 rewards skillful play. There are some undesirable factors in the format to some players, but I think those undesirable factors, things like double colorless energy, things like Dusknoir, which makes it so it's hard to play against some decks, also prevent other, factors from getting out of hand. 2010 is this collection of some of the most broken cards of all time, and we managed to get a balance because they're all put together in the right way. The pieces all fit together. You can have things like Broken Time Space and Jumpluff be incredibly toxic, but it's bad because there's something like Gardevoir around. Essentially, in the same format, you can have lots of broken cards, but then you also have weird checks to them. I gave the Jumpluff example, but also there's things like Uxie and Mesprit, which are very powerful cards, which in many formats would just be completely broken. But because you have, Dusknoir, which forces you to watch your bench, there's things like that get balanced. Extremely powerful big basics, but also take out Machamp, which instantly knocks them out. Interesting counterplay, stuff like that. Reasons like that are things why you can have all these broken cards and ultimately have a pretty good metagame that comes out of it. Now recently I've had claims of Tier 0 deck syndrome. Everyone calls Cursegar the Tier 0 deck. Mainly because Cursegar has been played to a lot of online tournaments. It's won, I believe, 5 online tournaments, which is the most out of any deck by a significant margin. And a lot of that was in the early parts where it won 3 tournaments in a row was just because people were not playing any of the decks that Cursegar loses to. Once people started showing up a little bit more with the Sableye decks with Tyranitar, Cursegar doesn't win as many events, right? Because it cannot beat Tyranitar unless it cheeses it. It cannot beat the Sableye decks in most cases because the Sableye decks cheese Gengar. So you kind of still have the metagame developing. People falsely claiming there's Tier 0 decks. People's Tier 0 decks having auto losses. Feels like every deck has a decent amount of checks and balances except maybe Dialga is the closest, because you can build a really, really bad Dialga list playing things like Staraptor FB level X, but Dialga is just so strong that it doesn't matter how many bad cards you play in the deck. It can be a terrible list, but it can still work well. Regardless to say, though, the format's awesome. There's a lot of great games to be had, lots of awesome one-of-a-kind strategies in the format that make it the most fun Pokemon format, in my opinion. MD Call, some people call it Better 2010. I call it 2010 for Dummies. Not 2010 Worlds for Dummies, the video, but 2010 for Dummies. This format does not have Claydol, so decks are setting up just kind of raw draw off their Uxies if they're going to use this out of Pokepower, and you're going to spray them and they're going to concede. Decks are pretty inconsistent in MD Call because they can't have that Claydol cycle draw engine, and SP is absolutely broken. They also took a lot of the counterplay out of the format. You do not have Unknown G to block Takeout Machamp, so an SP deck is broken. However, you might just get turn 2 Machamped and judged and item locked, and then you just lose the game, because they're just going to use the same attack 6 times in a row and win. That's one thing about MD Call, is it's missing a lot of the interesting counterplay. Things like Kurskar's item lock is held up by a Pokemon that has to be in the active spot, but Vileplume can be on the bench, so you can stick any attacker in the active spot. You don't have to play a hit and run strategy to maintain that item lock. So you just get game-long item lock. You have SP being very unbalanced in a format without Claydol. Yes, there is Spiritomb, but things like Dialga are very, very hard to beat because they are fine using Uxie, whereas the evolution decks do appreciate the added draw power that Claydol provided. MD Call is a lot simpler. Decks like Magnezone Prime, while very cool, are using 1 or 2 attacks instead of like 5 or 6 different attacks, which the Magnezone Level X deck would in 2010. Gengar is only running 1 Gengar most of the time, rather than running 2 different Gengars. It's just worse 2010. The games are a lot worse. It's not as fun. I haven't played the format to an extent where I'd say I'm like an expert at it, but I've played Vilegar, I've played Magnezone, I've played against Gyarados, I've played against SP. Everything in the format just makes it 2010, but less fun. D tier. I would not want to play this format. Majestic Dawn of Black and White, I have not played enough to judge. This is the format where they had to initiate an emergency mid-season rotation. Nobody plays this format because it is unplayable, quite literally. But it is historically important as the format where Sabeldonk is the deck to be scared of. The turn 1 going first win. 2011 Worlds is an interesting format. This is a format that gets a lot of hate, rightfully so sometimes, for some of the decks. Reshiflosion is very, very simple, straightforward deck. Magnabore, very, very linear as well. Things like Stage 1's also pretty linear. And it's the kind of format where if you play the same matchup 5 times, you've seen every outcome that the matchup provides. Instead of having things like Roseanne in the format, you have Collector. MD Call also has this problem. You have less complex cards in the format. You have a lot of just prime Pokemon being very good, and you have black and white Pokemon being very big. And again, you don't really get the complexity mix, except there is one card in the format that makes it great, and that is Yanmega Prime. Yanmega Prime, one of my favorite cards of all time, is a card that attacks for free if you have the same hand size as your opponent. And getting to maneuver, how do I make optimal plays while keeping my hand at the same size as the opponent, is super challenging. It's like a puzzle every single turn. Playing Yanmega Mirrors is fun because Yanmega will always 2-hit KO itself with 70 and 40 because it's 110 HP, so if you smack an opponent's Yanmega for 70, you can then snipe it for 40 on the bench, knocking it out. Yanmega's easily the most fun card in the format, and it's probably the single redeeming factor that makes the format really fun to come back to, because otherwise decks like Reshiflosion, Magnabore, things like the Truth are relatively linear in comparison. I know the Truth, it seems like this super, complex deck, and it's definitely a deck you can play wrong, but it's also super linear because just get the Vileplume up, get the Reuniclus up, get your big guys up, and don't discard too many pieces along the way, and you win. With that said, I'll put it in C tier. 2011 is a format I like. It's a format that I enjoy playing, but it's not a good competitive format. It gets old. It's something I play every once in a while. I do actually think that it's better than Heart Silver Block. We'll move that upwards. Is that here? Yes, HS Block. There we go. HS Block is essentially the same as 2011 Worlds, but you're missing one set. You're missing the black and white cards. And again, we get this mixture, which I kind of like. Now, in the case of the black and white cards, they're a little too powerful. And in the case of the Heart Silver card, they're not complex enough. So you get this lower level complexity versus high power Pokemon, but gone a little wrong because the black and white Pokemon are a little too powerful, and the Heart Silver cards are not complex enough. But You still do get that good balance in 2011, with cards like Rush Eflosion, Reshiram being a very simple brain dead card versus Yanmega being a more complex, weaker card. In HS Block, it is kind of like a Tier 0 format surrounding Primetime. Primetime, I haven't played a ton of this format because I don't have it built. I just play it on TCG 1 every once in a while because I get bored. It's what's up. Primetime is arguably, or like inarguably, the best deck in the format, and the other best deck in the format, in my opinion, would just be the Umbreon deck that wins against Primetime by just blocking it out of attacking, because it blocks all effects of Pokemon that have abilities. So you just throw up Umbreon and you attack, and then Primetime cannot attack you. And you just wear them down faster than they wear you down. And in that metagame, it's not good because you don't have any of the bigger things that beat Primetime. Every deck's going to lose to Primetime if Primetime gets what it wants. The Yanmega Magnezone is Primetime, by the way. Whereas, you don't really have a bigger deck that can run through it that creates that interesting divide in playstyle. It's just Primetime is the best, and then you have one deck that just auto-walls it out. None of the other decks in HS Block look very cool. It's not like there's a black and white removed these decks from contention with its power creep. It's like the decks don't beat Primetime even in this format, so they're not good in 2011 or HS Block. Things like Float Stoys are not going to be meta in HS Block, for instance, versus 2011 Worlds. It's not like there's a huge difference in the metagame. It's just that there's no Reshiram decks, there's no Zekrom, no Juniper, stuff like that. I mean, realistically, it's just worse than 2011, so I'll just put it here. I would always rather play 2011 just because there is more variety of stuff I can do. 2011 Cities, HSNVI. This is one of the first formats I ever built for my retro collection, because it's one of the first formats I played in. Now, I didn't play competitively back in the day, so I didn't have to experience the reign of Durant, but this format is really, I suppose, infamous for its lock decks and its just turbo big basic decks. And a lot of the problems of this format come down to two cards being Vileplume and Pokemon Catcher. And the third card, I guess I'll add to that, being a Violite. Pokemon Catcher is Instant Gust. It means the evolution decks are super vulnerable to just being donked by big basics. And big basics like Zekrom in this format are very good because you have things like Electric around to recharge your energy with Dynamotor. Just like the new Electric, just like Flaffy. So those decks are very powerful and can instantly gust you. So all the best evolution decks rely on using Vileplume, so they don't get gusted. But Vileplume locks out the big basic faster decks of about 50% of their deck. The second that a Vileplume goes into play, it's really hard to actually get the Vileplume up to the active spot, nearly impossible in fact. So these decks just frequently don't, and they just go the rest of the game without playing half their deck. Not really the best interaction. The other card that's really gross in this format is Eviolite, which it gives the basic Pokemon it's attached to takes 20 less damage from attacks. This card should not have been printed in this format because it basically means that weaker attacks just kind of bounce off. Things like Yanmega's attacks will not KO a Durant, right? Which is why things like Yanmega, these more heavy Pokemon that, or these lighter Pokemon, that don't really one-shot, really don't see that much play in this metagame. You do see some spread decks, but they're also countered by Eviolite. If you play something like a Kyurem spread deck, which are very good in this metagame, but your opponent just gets turn one triple Eviolite, the game's over. Durant is a very evil deck. People say it loses to Chandyplume. It does not always lose to Chandyplume. I have not won that matchup yet. Turns out, if you have a deck that takes 3 attachments to attack, Durant will just deck you out before you can attack. Meaning that a lot of times you will lose what should be a good matchup just because you'll just get decked out way too fast. Yes, they can recover even under item lock. They can get their Durants back, which makes the matchup impossible. So with that in the format, you have lock decks, you have really fast big basic decks. There are some really interesting strategies, some one-of-a-kind, really fun decks to play, like the Electrode Prime blow-up decks, like Chandyplume, which is very cool. Donphan Dragons is very cool. There's a lot of cool decks in a really, really bad toxic metagame. So I'll put it in D tier. This used to be like one of my favorite metas. Just Durant is tier 0 if you ask me. Nothing reliably beats Durant besides like the Zekrom decks pretty much, or Reshiram, Reshiflosion, which is otherwise. Reshiflosion is not that good in this metagame because it does not match up well against any of the slower decks, but it does beat Durant. It does beat Durant. Now we have 2012 Worlds. 2012 Worlds, interesting metagame once again. I'm a little more fond of 2012 in terms of like bad metas, because it has a lot of interesting one-of-a-kind things that see play, kind of like 2011 Cities that we just talked about. You have the Mewtwo Wars, where Mewtwo's one-shotting other Mewtwo. You have things like Smeargle seeing play. A lot of really unique factors in this format that make it memorable, and that's one of the things I really like about some of these retro formats, is you get these interesting snapshots into a time where a very specific strategy was the best. Like how 2009 gives you the snapshot of Flygon being like the best it's ever going to be. And you get this little snapshot in 2012 of just Darkrai and Mewtwo being the 2 best EXs, and everything in the game revolving around Darkrai and Mewtwo. Sometimes the games of this format are pretty bad. I'm not going to lie. It's very hard to make a good comeback sometimes, depending on what deck you're playing. And sometimes you just get sacked. But it is also pretty fun to play. So despite being bad, I would still play this format. I enjoy it every once in a while, and you can get some really, really good games in it. So I'll put it in D tier. Despite 2012 being a format with like, you know, really bad gameplay sometimes, I think the best games of these formats are like just as good as like good games of like EX and like 2008. When you get some really, really fun games every once in a while. 2013 is a Saki format. This one is interesting. It's Darkrai is still relevant. Mewtwo is still decently relevant in this format, but Mewtwo's a little fallen off this year. Instead, in its place, you have the big 3 of this format are Darkrai and Team Plasma and Blastoise. Those are like the big 3 decks. So every single deck in this format, it feels like, is running counters to Darkrai with like fighting types. You have Terrakion and Landorus in like half the decks, or they're running usually counters to Team Plasma, which counters to Team Plasma usually is just running a lot of Enhanced Hammer to get rid of special energy. So you end up with this really weird format where it feels like every single deck, again, this really weird snapshot metagame where every single deck looks like it's out to get these decks, and they'll still lose to Darkrai, they'll still lose to Team Plasma, and Blastoise is just ridiculously good if it gets set up. But then you also have these super unbalanced decks like Blastoise, Team Plasma, and Darkrai. The reason they're so good is because of the turn 1 rules that play to their advantage. In turn 1 in this format, you can attack. Turn 1 in this format, you can use supporter cards, you can use item cards. You can turn 1 gust out your opponent and kill them. And you can use 3 Dark Patches to power up your Darkrai with 3 energy on the bench and retreat into it, and then launch a Night Spear for 90 damage. You can also play Plasma and reliably launch an attack that does 60 damage and 30 to the bench, and then poison your opponent to do like 70 or 90 damage with the Burbank City Gym. There's no way around the lasers in this format. It is super sacky and super unbalanced. 2013 is definitely one of the like metas where it's like it's very hard sometimes to get a good game of 2013, but I also feel like it's got a lot of unique decks. It's fun to play. If you do play like a scripted matchup, it's one of those formats where I would never choose to play it competitively, though. So I'm going to put it in D tier. I don't think it's F tier, even despite its sackiness. I enjoy a lot of the decks in 2013, and I would play a 2013 tournament just for fun. I would never want to play with big stakes, though. Crazy sacky format. Blastoise is broken, but if I open up my Squirtle, I lose, and I go second, I might just lose the game. There's like a 75% chance I'm just losing. 2014, a little less sacky. 2014, there's no turn 1 attack, which really kind of reins in Plasma to be a much more reasonable degree. It feels like there's more supporter cards in 2014, so it's a little less based around Juniper and N. Every deck's still going to run like 4 of them, but in 2013, those are like every deck has to run 4 Juniper, 4 N, and then you're like picking through the dumpster bin for your other supporters. 2014 decks feel a little bit more consistent, but way less sacky. You do get stuff like Pyroar and like Turbo Lugia. People love those decks because they exist to sack. But 2014 has some interesting games, both the States format, which is NXDXY, and Worlds. I would put these both in the C tier. There's not a huge difference between them. I prefer the States format, which is NXDXY, because it does not have Pyroar, it does not have Lysander in the format. And not having Lysander creates a lot more interesting dynamics. However, it also creates a much more broken Trevenant metagame, where Trevenant destroys a lot of decks that are not like the Verizon Genesect deck. If you don't have a way to deal with the item lock, you kind of just lose because you can't gust around it without Lysander. Lysander makes the metagame worse because stage 2s get significantly worse when you can just gust them constantly. Things like Blastoise and Raybor, significantly worse in the 2014 Worlds meta. But both are still fun. I like both these metagames. I enjoy playing them a lot more than 2013, for instance. But, I think 2013 is unique in how broken it is. It's a metagame that's got charming almost for how stupid every deck has to play around. Like, you have your Flareon deck with, like, a 3-2 Drifblim line, a Garbodor line, and 3 Enhanced Hammers to help beat the Plasma matchup, and then you have your 1 of Landorus, 1 of Terrakion to help beat the Darkrai matchup, and oh boy. Every deck's just like, I'm gonna put fighting types and Enhanced Hammers in there. It's charming in its own way, I guess. Now, I did not play pre-ban Trump card format. I was out of the game at this time, and I am not rebuilding Trump card format. So I'm not going to talk about Trump card format, but essentially this format, Lysander's Trump card had to get banned from the game, for those who don't know, because you could infinitely loop your deck with it. It puts every card in each player's discard pile back into the deck, and what the game ended up being based around was decks that would play through their whole deck really quickly, while locking the opponent out of playing their deck. So you had Seismitoad, which would do 30 damage with Quaking Punch, lock the opponent out of item cards, while drawing through its whole deck and playing a bunch of coin flip item cards that are very powerful for no cost, because they just go back into the deck. If you flip tails, who cares? And then you had the other half of that, which was Executor, which was the counter to Seismitoad, because it hit Grass weakness, and Executor would lock your opponent out of playing supporter cards. So you're poisoning your opponent with Hypnotoxic Laser, you're locking them out of either using supporter items, and you're looping your deck. It's a really toxic metagame, not fun, probably wouldn't enjoy it, I don't want to touch it. It would for sure be an F tier if I actually ranked it. 2015 Worlds is certainly an interesting format. It's hard to talk about, honestly, because it's like potential format. 2015 is a very wide metagame. There is a ton of really, really cool decks in this format, but the gameplay is some of the worst in Pokemon TCG history. You do not have Lysander's Trump card, thankfully, around, but what you do get in return is extremely sacky games. Pretty much every single game is going to be over by turn 2, despite there being tons of comeback cards, tons of unique archetypes. A lot of games just don't feel good to play. Recovery is really bad, so a lot of times you're just forced to Sycamore away your opening hand of cards that you need, and you just lose the game because the recovery cards are terrible. There's also pretty bad search cards. There's like the best search card is Ultra Ball, and then the second best search card is Repeat Ball. So like if that tells you like the downgrade from a 10 out of 10 card into a 2 out of 10 card, it's pretty big, unless you're playing like Water specifically for the, Dive Ball, or playing specifically Team Plasma cards and playing Team Plasma Ball. Which is a shame. I like 2015. There's a lot of really cool decks. I like the Don Fan Hit and Run deck. I like Wailord Stall. I like Balanced Night March, a little bit more balanced rather. I think Bronzong Box is cool. I think Mega Rayquaza is cool. I think Mega Manectric is cool, but all of the games that I've played to this format are really, really bad. The games just don't feel good. So I'm going to put it in F tier. Again, there's so many cool archetypes. Primal Groudon. The Bats decks are fun, but the games are bad. So F tier. Then we have 2016. 2016, interesting format. You have basically the entire XY series. We'll move the XY block up here for after this. There we go. 2016 has Greninja added to the pool, and you get a lot better Megas. You don't just have Mega Manectric and Primal Groudon. Now you have more Megas. You have things like Mega Audino and Mega Sceptile added to the pool. You have Bronzong, Metal Box still. You have Volcanion now. Seismitoad is a lot worse in 2016 Worlds. It was good throughout most of the season, but at 2016 Worlds you don't see that many good Seismitoad decks. You have Water Box, which is pretty good. Toad Bats is kind of bad. And some decks just run like a one-of Seismitoad just to use it. I don't know. I think 2016 is interesting. I think it's got one of the best card pools of any format, like in terms of like trainer cards you can use, having VS Seeker, having so many different like interesting tech supporter cards like Karina and Teammates in the format, and Olympia. But I think a lot of the decks in this format are toxic. Things like Greninja are pretty gross. Greninja is basically just a setup and I win deck. If they don't set up, they don't win. They kind of just need to cheese you in some way, shape, or form. Past Greninja, you have Night March, which is also in this format much more powerful than 2015 in my opinion, because it gets access to single prize Mew to copy its attacks, and just feels like there's not really a good answer to Night March in this format. There's not a good way to shuffle away its cards back into the deck yet, which we'll get into with XY block. And then you also get Vespiquen decks, which are very broken. All of these just feel very, very broken, not very fun to play. The gameplay can be very sacky, a lot of item spam, 10-minute turns. It's fun to play every once in a while, but I'd rather just play 2012, 2013, honestly, just because they're less turbo. Like, I don't know, 2016, like, I feel like I'd rather play a 2016 game than 2013 sometimes, but like 2016 is definitely not great. I don't know. I can't put it. Can I put it in? I'm gonna put it up to D tier. Like, it's definitely. I would rather play 2016 than either of these two formats. So, XY block. I don't have. I'm gonna rank it down here. I've played like 5 games of XY block. It's barely any different from 2016 Worlds, but what XY block does add, it adds Karen to counter Night March, and it adds Giratina to counter Greninja. These are important counter cards to counter some of the most annoying decks. It would probably be in D tier as well, with a slightly higher ranking than 2016 because you get a better card pool, more viable decks, counters to cringe decks. Thank you. PRC Evo. I played this format back in the day, but I haven't played it since because this is right when I got back into the game after a 2-year hiatus. And PRC Evo is like a tier 0 format based around Evoltol Garbodor, but it's like there is a lot of other decks. One of the main things that I don't like about the format is just that there's just these insanely long turns. Decks are playing so many item cards: Max Elixir, Trainer's Mail, Ultra Ball, Shaman, draw up to 6 again, Trainer's Mail again for Max Elixir, shuffle the deck, Max Elixir, whiff, shuffle the deck, Max Elixir, whiff, shuffle the deck, Trainer's Mail, grab Ultra Ball, discard 2 cards, grab Shaman, shuffle the deck, draw 6, Trainer's Mail, grab Sycamore, shuffle the deck. Like, these turns are so long in this format. But like, I remember enjoying myself during this format. Playing Raichu was pretty fun in this format. That's what I was playing at the time it was around in Standard, because that's what I could afford on PTCGO. I feel like if I played this format again, like, it's not going to be good, is the thing. But it's like, it's probably going to be better than 2016, but because it doesn't have Night March in it, but it's still going to be like a bad format. It is a format where there's no tool removal for Garbodor. So Garbodor just kind of remains item locked, or your ability locked the whole game, which is not the most fun in the world, honestly. But I'm going to rank it D tier. I'm not completely confident. It might be F tier if I played this more. It might be C tier, because it does. I remember there being some good games in this format to be had. Next up we have PRC GRI. This is actually one of my favorite formats. And this is the probably the most interesting format of the 2017 season. You have, of course, PRC Evo, which comes before that, and then you have 2017 Worlds. This is later in the season, and the biggest card that debuts in this format is Garbodor. And Garbodor says no more 10-minute turns. If you're playing against Garbodor deck, you gotta watch your item usage, because its Trash or Lynch does 20 times the amount of items your opponent has used. It's a very good balancing factor of the format. Trainer's Mail basically gets eliminated from deck lists as they have to just completely restructure themselves. Some decks don't even play Versus Seeker. If they decide that playing Rare Candy in their Vikabulu deck is more important than Versus Seeker, then they're not playing Versus Seeker. So you get really interesting deck list decisions. You still get some greedy single prize decks like Vespiquen that can play all the items they want because they have 90 HP, they're going to get one shot by everything anyway. But I think the format makes deck building a lot more interesting, and you get some incredibly good gameplay. Now the format is centralized among a few decks, being Drampagarb and Volcanion, I'd say, were probably the two decks in the modern era that get the most play. But you do have a lot of really, really fun decks in this format. I really like Vikabulu, and it's a decent deck. I really like Trevenant Garbodor. I really like Alolan Ninetales, even though it's very straightforward. And again, you're getting this mix of new Sun and Moon cards that are like more powerful, mixed in with like these mega decks from X and Y, like Mega Gardevoir and Mega Rayquaza, which kind of have these different strategies. A little bit, I wouldn't say they're complex in the same way that like 2010 has like the complex DP cards versus the simple HS cards. 2007 has the complex EX card versus the simple DP cards. The new Sun and Moon cards are actually more complex. They have 3 attributes versus the Sun and Moon 2, but you do get some interesting X and Y decks still present. It's the last stand for a lot of X and Y era cards because come 2017 Worlds, there's one set introduced, but there's a ton of power creep that basically eliminate the entire tier 2 and lower decks from PRC GRI. Things like Zoroark from Breakthrough, Gyarados from Ancient Origins, stuff like that was good during PRC GRI just does not succeed in the Worlds format, where it's much more power crept and based around GX Pokemon. And for that, I think this format is really, really good. You know, it has its flaws. I do think it's a very matchup-reliant format. There's a lot of decks that just cannot deal with weakness. Something like a Metagross is usually going to lose 95% of the time to like Volcanion, which is a fire deck that one-shots it. But I really like the format. I enjoy playing it. It's my favorite format from 2017 by far. Worlds is also pretty good. You do get a very centralized metagame around like 3 or 4 different decks. You have the Garbodor deck, you have Gardevoir, and then you have like Alolan Ninetales, and it's like some Decidueye stuff mixed in there. Golisopod is a much more powerful partner for Garbodor, so it sees a lot more play in this format than things like Espeon, but Espeon is still alright. Drampagarb is still pretty good. This format feels more linear, the gameplay is less good. You have the Kiawe decks, which are very much bot decks, not fun to play against. And Gardevoir just feels sometimes a little invincible if it gets set up the way it wants, but it's still good. It's just less good than PRC GRI, but it's not like so much less good that I'm going to rank it down here. I think I will move 2014 up. We'll move these. I would rather play 2014 than 2017, so we're going to move them up to B tier. I might change my mind later, but like, I would rather play 2011 than 2017, but 2011's meta is worse, if that makes sense. Let's talk about some of these mid-season formats. Let's move that up. I believe that's the only one we need. Oh yeah, we need to get to Black and White Block as well. I'm going a little ahead and then a little behind here, because some of these are out of order. There we go. A little bit confusing. There we go. So 2014, Black and White to Phantom Forces. We're going back to 2014. Yep, 3 years back in time. I forgot to rank this. This is one of the first expanded formats, because expanded was introduced in this time period, and essentially it just ignores the last rotation. So you keep, or the last 2 rotations, so you keep all the cards that were rotated out. In practice, you don't actually lose that much to rotation at this time. Essentially, you just get slightly more beefed up versions of decks that have access to like Pokemon communication, but also have access to things like Battle Compressor. This is a format where Trump Card is legal, so it gets a little chaotic. I've played a couple of games of it. It seems like in a competitive metagame for this format, the format would base mostly around Mega Manectric, which in Japan had like something like 50% of the tournament results for this format. Not to say that it's, you know, BDIF like tier 0 kind of thing, but the gameplay is just, I think, less good than 2014 in my opinion. Like, from what I've played of it, decks having Battle Compressor makes things like Flareon a lot more powerful, but that's not a good thing in my opinion, because I like Flareon in 2013 and 14, where the deck is kind of clunky and less straightforward. I'm just going to discard my whole deck, and if I deck myself out, I can just Lie to Ender's Trump Card if need be, is how a lot of decks play. I don't know. It's probably C tier, D tier at worst. Seismitoad's gross, but it's fine in this format from what I've seen. I haven't played a ton of this, so like if I play more of the format, it might change my opinion of it, but I'm just going to give first impression rankings from like 3 games with Lugia and Flareon and Empoleon. That's probably where the format stands. Black and White Block is very similar to 2013 Worlds, except it adds Virizion Genesect, which is arguably the best deck in the format. It's probably in the same tier as 2013, but it's just probably a little bit worse because Virizion Genesect is very good. Doesn't have as easy of counterplay. I guess you can throw Victini into your deck. You can have Big Tex, the deck with fighting types, a bunch of Enhanced Hammer, and fire types, just to counter Plasma, Virizion Genesect, and Darkrai, all in one deck. I don't know. I don't have an interest in playing Black and White Block ever. I've never played it, so I'm just going to put it down here, honestly. That's being more honest with myself. I've played like 2 games of X and Y Block. Not that much different. I've never played Black and White Block just because I'd always play 2013 over it. But it's probably the same tier, realistically, as 2013. Legacy is an interesting format. I think last time I did a tier list, I actually ranked Legacy in A tier. Legacy is a format that's interesting because with Vileplume, the format's actually really bad, but if you just play with an informal ban on Vileplume, the same way that people in Rocket On and Base Neo play with like the Sneasel, or sorry, play with the Slowking informal ban, then the format gets a lot better. I think the format is the best way to play black and white cards. It feels very fun to play. There's a lot of interesting decks that you can build with black and white cards plus Junk Arm. You get stuff like Flareon Yanmega that are very interesting blends of black and white cards mixed with modern. And you get a lot of iconic decks succeeding in new and interesting ways, like Reshiflosion with Ability Lock, because Ability Lock doesn't lock Poke Powers, it only locks abilities. So you can use Reshiflosion, since they're all Poke Powers, you can use Typhlosion under Ability Lock while slowing down your opponent. So you get some interesting mixes. The format also has less interesting decks, like Lando Garb in this format, which is way less interesting than like its 2014 counterpart, which plays more like a counter box. And in Legacy, Lando Garb is just big guy hit hard, ability lock you. So with that said, I'm going to put it in B tier. I don't think it's A tier anymore just because I've played more of the format, and like every once in a while there's just like gross decks. There's the informal ban you have to play with. Things like Sableye Control are in the format and are just absolutely disgusting with Junk Arm, not fun to play against. So I'm going to put it in B tier. And then you have expanded Black and White to Burning Shadows. I added this to the tier list because this is something that my locals play. This is a format where Forest of Giant Plants was banned, but Galisipod did come out, so the format is very much dominated by things like Galisipod Garb and Drampa Garb. But also by, of course, older decks like Night March and Turbo Dark, which got a buff in this format. Mega Ray is very good in this format. Seismitoad is very good in this format. Vileplume plus Walls is very good in this format, from what I remember. It's been since 2017 since I played it. I quit during this format playing the online TCG client because I despise playing against the Ho-Oh decks, and that's about all I have to say. So I'm going to put this in Have Not Played. Realistically, if I were to play it, it's probably D tier. just because it's an expanded format. It's very fast. It's got Night March, stuff like that. Mega Ray at full power is not very fun either. They didn't ban Puzzle yet, so you can play Sable Puzzle. I used to enjoy playing that. My opponents didn't enjoy playing against it. Not a fun deck to play, but is what it is. Then we have Modern EX. I'm going to put this in Have Not Played Again. This is a really interesting format. It's called Modern EX. It's an expanded format. Essentially, it contains all of the cards from Black and White through X and Y. So the idea is that you have this just 2 separate blocks put together, similar to Legacy, but this was actually a historical expanded format. The best deck in this format, from what I understand, is Maxi's Yveltal, which was a deck where you would use Yveltal to put Archeops into play, preventing either player from evolving their Pokemon, or you would put Gallade into play, which is a strong fighting type attacker, which can rearrange the top 5 cards of your deck, and then you have these very powerful Yveltal attackers, which just beat stick big guy attackers. I think there's probably a lot of potential for good games in this format. However, there's also Archeops is unbanned, so you're also just going to win a lot of games on turn 1. There is full power Night March in this format, full power Vespiquen that can just win on turn 1. I wouldn't want to play this format. It doesn't interest me to want to play it. Moving back to Sun and Moon, because I skipped, those guys. Sun and Moon, this is Breakthrough to Forbidden Light. This was the triangle meta format. This is Tord Reklev's favorite format, I believe, if I remember correctly, but this was a triangle meta format. You had Zoroark decks, you had Buzzwole decks, and you had Malamar decks, and they form like a triangle. Now, it isn't 100% win rate either way, like Buzzwole doesn't beat Zoroark 100% of the time, and Malamar doesn't beat Buzzwole 100% of the time. Zoroark does beat Malamar most of the time, but it was kind of a format where there was like 3 different kinds of decks. I didn't like playing at this time, personally. I just think most of the 2018 season, because of Buzzwole, ended up being a little ruined. I don't like Max Elixir Buzzwole. I don't like some of the Zoroark puzzle combos because it feels a little gross, feels a little toxic. From my experience at the time, it would go in D tier. 2018 Worlds is kind of a similar idea. 2018 Worlds is 1 set more than this last format, so you have Celestial Storm added to the pool. Celestial Storm does add more decks to the format. You go from being a 3-deck format to having, you have the Shrine decks like Buzzgarb Shrine. You have a lot of stall, different things you can play with Shrine as well. But you also get Turbo Ray. I call him Big Raymond. Essentially, that deck is going to mill itself down to like 3 cards in deck on turn 1 and just take a knockout on a 2-prizer and then win in 3 turns. Very uninteresting deck, very unfun to play. I do like Buzzgarb Shrine. I like Yveltal Break with Shrine of Punishment. There's some cool 2018 decks, and 2018 Worlds can produce some of my favorite games of all time. But on average, you're going to load up a game and you're going to see your opponent Max Elixir, Floatstone, and just knock out your guy. So like, it's like the mining meme where the dude's looking back and there's like the diamonds there, and he's dug through like 10 games of 2018 absolute dog water slop, unplayable Max Elixir Buzzwole, Max Elixir Rayquaza gameplay. But then if he would have just played one more game, he might have hit that really cool like Zoroark Mirror or single prize Shrine deck versus Buzzwole, where they whiff all of their Max Elixirs and take themselves out back after the game where you just win by 1 prize card kind of game. So D tier is what I'm saying. But you can get some good games in this format. It's just very linear meta. I had a hard time picking a 9th deck to build for my gauntlet because every single deck was just Zoroark or fighting Slop or Rayquaza. So I picked Greninja, which is also Slop. Then we have Blacephalon right here for Sumlot, the representative Sumlot. Sumlot is a post-rotation format, the first new set released in the 2018-19 season. So you have no more XY cards, which means Max Elixir is gone. God bless. Never come back. Max Elixir, of course, being one of the most disgusting cards that ruled the 2018 Worlds metagame, being gone somewhat, has a lot more interesting things to say. The format has a ton of different Stage 2 decks because of Ninetales being legal now. Ninetales allows decks to set up their Stage 2s reliably by finding them their rare candies. So you have a lot of meta Stage 2s like Gardevoir GX, like Zoroark Decidueye. The best Zoroark deck is not like a Zoroark with other Stage 1, it's a Zoroark with other Stage 2. You have really cool decks like Meganium around, which are not super viable, but Meganium Greninja I think is pretty solid. I've played it to 2 second place tournaments in the Sumlot format, in like retro side event tournaments, right? I should clarify, not like regionals. So like you have a lot of really cool decks, and frankly it's one of the widest metagames for rogue decks of all time. You could build like 50 Sumlot decks and still be building new cool decks. Not all of them are made equal, of course, but they're like somewhat viable. Things like Quagnag, a little questionable whether they're viable or not, right? But you do have really cool rogue decks, things like White Kyurem. You have rogue decks, or decks that feel like they should be rogue that are actually meta, like Granbull, where you have to have 0 cards in hand for your attack every turn. There's a lot of things to love about Sumlot. There's also a lot of things to hate, though. Sumlot has... it's the format where Marshadow became very good to spam, so sometimes you just get cheesed by a Marshadow. It doesn't happen that often if you are an Evolution deck, but if you are a big basic deck, your consistency is kind of not that great. You're relying on, smooth over Macargo. Then a lot of times, yeah, Marshadow can cheese you. And there's also a lot of problems with stall. Stall and control are very good in this metagame. The rats come out of the shed, so to speak, to play this format, and every single Sumlot tournament you're going to see people playing stall or control, because this is like one of the formats where it's at its strongest. That's not like an expanded format. So a lot of people enjoy playing those decks. They are not fun to play against. I can beat them with my lists, with some of my lists that I've built, but that doesn't mean that I want to play every game with 8 counter cards to stall or control in my deck so that I can actually play against them. Sometimes I just want to play, Vicaray against, let's just say Solgaleo GX or something fun, right? I don't always want to play against stall. I don't want to always play against Zoroark control or Swampert control and watch my opponent use 3 crushing hammers every turn, right? Like, you can beat these decks with playing your deck well and putting cards in for it, but you don't always want to commit the deck space to that. And that's the difficulty with this format. For a while there, stall was winning most of the tournaments, control was doing really well at tournaments, and people kind of went off of the format because it was getting very popular for a while, and then people started to see that stall and control is really good. They don't want to play against that when they're trying to just have fun with a casual retro format. A lot of people forget that most people just play for fun, right? Myself included, I also mostly just play for fun. But I still think that Sumlot is one of the most fun formats to play. If I'm going to just play a Sun and Moon format just for the gameplay alone, I just want to play Sumlot because most games of Sumlot are going to be fun. There's a ton of different strategies, pretty much every single kind of strategy in the game's history, like spread, control, Stage 2, Stage 1, basic, single prizer, basics, single prizer, Stage 1, single prizer, Stage 2s, toolboxes. You have everything in this format is at least like somewhat playable, so I enjoy the variety that it offers and that every game feels fun to play unless you're playing against stall or control. Next up we have Sun and Moon to Team Up, one of the biggest fall-offs in history. You went from this metagame dominated by, yes, Blacephalon is very good, and Zoroark is very good, but there's a lot of Stage 2s in Sumlot. A lot of Stage 2s. Stage 2s are very good in Sumlot. Stage 2s in Team Up are very bad, because Pikarom says, I will take 4 prizes against your Stage 2 deck in 1 turn, and that is very bad. So Ninetales goes from being this great support engine to help Stage 2s get on the board, to giving your opponent 4 prize cards. And this is when tag teams debuted, and the entire year of 2019, in my opinion, people will cope and defend these formats, but every single format from 2019 is F tier. Most of the games of any of the 2019 formats are all terrible. A lot of people like Sun and Moon 2 Unbroken Bonds because there's a lot of fun rogue decks like Wheezing Spread and like the Spirit Tomb Counterbox decks that are pretty cool. But the gameplay is still revolving around Pikachu and Zekrom, which is here the entire year, and all of the games against Pikachu and Zekrom are awful. So ultimately, I'm going to put all the formats in F tier. I've made an entire video series about why I hate everything to do with tag teams, and that should be enough said. Next up, we have pandemic era formats. Let's do SM Block, actually. SM Block is... it's this very weird coping mechanism people use to say that, guys, block formats are actually good. We have all of the Sun and Moon sets in one format. As it turns out, even when you have all of the Pokemon that were released prior to tag teams legal, the tag teams still dominate. If you look at the results in the Japanese tournaments for this Sun and Moon block format, the top like 5 decks are still going to be, you know, Reshiram Charizard, ADP, Keldeo, Mewtwo Mew, Pikarom. Like, you're just going to have the big tag teams still dominating the metagame, and then you get Oranguru Control added there because that's super fun. And then you get like 1 or 2 like decks that are uniquely good in Sun and Moon block that are not good in other formats, like Golurk, and like Florges Control. But no, Florges Control was Ultra Prism Cosmic Eclipse, my bad. But this format sucks. It's a weird coping mechanism that people use to like defend Sun and Moon era like tag teams. Like, oh, they're not actually that bad. You can play this format where there's more decks, and you look at the metagame and it's like all tag teams, and then you have like Zoroark GX like 5%. Ooh, that's really exciting, guys. You really fixed Sun and Moon. Just play Sunlot. Just play 2017 GRI, 2017 Worlds, or Sunlot. Just ignore the tag teams. Speaking of tag team formats, the entire of the pandemic era up until 2021 was very defined by tag teams. This format right here was pretty bad. This was ADP Zacian's peak format, because this is where you had a lot of Boss's Orders. There's actually a lot of combo Zacian in this format as well. Ultra Prism Darkness Ablaze, very dominated by Zacian-based decks. I remember that quite well, being that Boss's Orders came out. There's also Dragapult, and there was the Eternatus, which I don't think was super great in this metagame, but it was good. It was definitely better post-rotation. And you had the tag teams, of course. The tag teams are still Pikachu, Zekrom, and Mewtwo Mew, and ADP. Still very good in this format. Very unfun format to play. Would not go back to this one. Team Up to Darkness Ablaze, widely considered by many modern players to be the worst modern format of all time. I would have to disagree, because I do think there are worse formats than 2020 than this format in particular. But it is pretty bad. It's again the tag teams, and they're up against just big VMAXs like Centiskorch and Eternatus. It's pretty linear, not very fun to play. I wouldn't recommend it personally, but this format has had a lot of weird fans of it. There's a lot of people who got into the game at this format who have this built for retro deck collections. So, bit of Stockholm Syndrome there, right? Next up, we have Players' Cup Invitational format. This was 2021 Team Up to Chilling Reign. This is essentially what would have been our World Championship format for 2021, just like this would have been our World Championship format for 2020, but being POG 2020. This is technically our World Championship format, what it would have been for 2021. Very cool event they put on with the Players' Cup Invitational, where we got to see Sugayoshi Yamato play TCGO and win, which was, for anyone who doesn't know, Sugayoshi Yamato was the 2004 World Champion and took top 8 in 2005, got top 30, or got top 16 in 2010. I think he got another top 8 in like 2008. Like, he was one of the guys where it's like, he's like the guy to beat for like the first like 6 years of World Championships until like 2011, where he kind of falls off the map, right? Stops playing, I think, as seriously. So seeing him come back was very cool. This was a very fun time to watch the game being played, but it was a very like mid-format. Shadow Rider with tag teams was gross. Ice Rider was gross. Path of the Peak did add a lot more comeback potential. Things to turn off Mewtwo Mew are always nice. I wouldn't go back to play this format though, so I'm gonna put it there. Team Up to Evolving Skies is like maybe the one format from the entire pandemic era that I would consider going back to. So I'm going to put it in D tier. This is the POG 2020, so this is the biggest team up on format, is what they chose for the POG formats for each year. And essentially this format was, you had a couple of new VMAXs like Leafeon and Shadow Rider still being really good, but then you also had some interesting tag team and V hybrids like ADP Birds, where ADP was pairing up with Moltres, Zapdos, the Vs. And you get some interesting decks in this format. It's not perfect, but if there was one format that I was going to go back and play, it would be this one. If I was going to build any of them. I don't build any of the formats from 2020 to 2022 in my collection, though. I'm just not even bothering. Sword and Shield into Evolving Skies. This format is liked by a lot of people. It is known as the Pick Your VMAX plus Inteleon format, since most decks that are not the single strike decks play a VMAX of a certain type, and they play Inteleon. This is when the Inteleon engine really exploded. The gameplay is really simple because VMAXs are just beat stick, big guy cards. Some do big damage and some do even bigger damage. That's what VMAXs do. Not really much complex about it. And the format gives a huge advantage. Like one of the most, there's been formats where it's been more advantageous to go first or second. Like obviously Diamond and Pearl especially, going second is very good when you get to use your trainer cards. And you don't get to do that going first. But this is definitely the format where it felt like going first was by far the best. Out of any format I've maybe ever played, there's a lot of formats where going second has felt stronger than this has going first. But going first in this format where everything is a stage 1 VMAX and is using 2 or 3 energy to attack felt incredibly powerful. I would not return to this format. I have no desire to play it again. Just a lot of different VMAXs, the variety in decks, but they all are just 310 to 330 HP guys that hit each other for 170 damage, basically. Next up, you have Sword and Shield to Brilliant Stars. This is a format from 2022 that I have built. It was my favorite format of 2022, and immediately after this format, the rest of 2022 is really bad. So I think the Lost Origin format was kind of okay. I liked the Lost Zone decks, but this format is all based around Arceus and Mew and Rapid Strike. So every single deck, it's kind of in the same way of 2013, having 3 really big kind of guys, and then every other deck feels like it's teching for those. This is the same format. So you see a lot of fighting types to beat Arceus, a lot of psychic types to beat Urshifu, and a lot of dark types to beat Mew. But then you have the things that flip on their head, because things like Arceus can play, their own fighting types and their own psychic types, because Arceus is super versatile, can be played with anything that is a V, and it can even be played with things that aren't Vs, like Beedrill or a single strike Beedrill that just instantly knocks out any Pokemon with special energy attached. You can play that with Arceus, why not? There's 30 different variants of Arceus, so I feel like the best way to play this format would just be have one Arceus deck built, and then just 30 sideboard cards to swap into your Arceus deck at any time. And maybe I'll do that eventually. For my format, I only have one Arceus deck built because they're weirdly expensive V-Stars. But this format is alright. I think it's very matchup heavy. Some things like Whimsicott can just cheese Rapid Strike down the drain. Some things like Rapid Strike can just absolutely cheese Suicune down the drain. You have some tough matchups, but if I was going to play a 2022 format, I would play this one. I can't in good faith put it in the C tier, because I would rather play 2012, 2013, 2016, but I'm going to put it in the D tier. Sure. 2022, on the other hand, this format gets a lot worse. You do get some cool decks like Regidrago Regigigas, the Regibox deck, and you get Radiant Charizard, but you also get Palkia, which is one of the most dominant decks in any standard metagame ever. And the format gets a lot faster. You get Hisuian Heavy Ball, which I wish this Brilliant Stars format had, but the format just gets so much worse. Over the course of Sword and Shield, they'd been continually trying to make water decks good, and you had Ice Rider, which was pretty good, but they had just been printing so much water support, and then it just kind of hit a tipping point where Astral Radiance printed even more water support with Irida and Radiant Greninja, and suddenly you have a deck that builds itself with Palkia because you have like 7 tailored water support cards that just go with Palkia, and you have backup attackers with Ice Rider, you have Greninja. It was just like, it just felt like the balloon was blowing up so big with just all these water type support cards, and all it needed was a water type that just deletes anything in the active spot with its attack. Again, Palkia has the attack called Subspace Swell, and basically it says that if your opponent's Pokemon has less than 300 HP, they are knocked out. Now, it doesn't actually read that, but it basically does, because it just knocks out anything in a single hit. Basically in the format, unless your opponent has like 1 benched Pokemon. Even then, they can force you to have more than 1. The format became entirely revolved around Palkia, with a few cool rogue decks mixed in that auto-lose to the Arceus variants that are around. Arceus is still good, but Arceus variants are very far and few in between now. Instead of having 30 different Arceus decks, you have like 4, and all of those Arceus decks are way less cool than the ones that came prior. So F-tier format. Would never go back. We have Sword and Shield block. This is at the end of 2022, so it contains all of the cards from Sword and Shield. This was a standard legal block, so this was an actual standard format, and it is really bad. There are a lot of people who cope. Every time there's a block format involved, there's always block copers who are like, the format's not actually that bad, you just don't play Lugia. Okay, that's not like not playing Licky Tongue in base Fossil, like not playing Lux Chump in 2010. Lugia is the heart and soul of this format. It was 30 to 40% of like basically every single regional championship metagame, because it was one of the strongest decks. Like, if you take like, even with Scarlet and Violet power creep, the Lugia in this format's power level was like, I think, higher than any Scarlet and Violet deck has reached so far. We have not seen a deck as powerful as the Lugia V-Star from Silver Tempest to Crown Zenith format since then. In my opinion, I feel like there's not been a deck that's been as strong as the Lugia since then. And I mean, it continues to show, like, Lugia is still good and expanded. This is also the format which was completely rune expanded with stuff like Regidrago V-Star and Lugia V-Star being unleashed. I would never play this metagame again. No thank you. 2023 Worlds is actually pretty interesting. This is Scarlet and Violet. Like, so again, you're getting this thing where you have the high power level V-Stars, but this time they're against the also high power level but more complex EX cards. So you kind of get a reverse scenario this time. These guys are more beat sticks, you know, like the Arceus V-Star, Lugia V-Star that are around in 2023. Lugia V-Star a little bit more reasonable in this format because they nerfed it with rotation. And then you have the new EX decks based around, you know, Gardevoir EX, Chenpao, stuff like that are kind of interesting. It feels a little undeveloped as a format because it felt like it didn't get to experience itself fully. Lost Zone is really broken in this format. Like the Lost Zone Tina, Lost Zone box decks just feel like they are by far the best if everything just goes, you know, fine for them. But Gardevoir is also decent. Lugia is very strong. There's a decent few decks you can play in the format. I would definitely go back and play this again. I would rank it B tier. BSD Pair, on the other hand, is a little bit better. I think I'm going to rank it A tier. It's like A-. I would rather play every other format here more than BST Pair, but I'd rather play BST Pair over 2023. This is the end of the year. Some people call this EFG if they want to include Baldean Fates, which adds like 2 new cards to the metagame as a reprint set. So some people call this EFG, I call it BST Pair, and essentially this was a format where you had all of the decks from 3 years of the game, because this is right before rotation. And it's a format that is incredibly diverse. You have Rapid Strike and Fusion Strike still seeing play from the 2021 sets, which were still legal. From 2022, you still have Arceus with Regigigas seeing play, you have Palkia seeing play, you have Lost Zone Tina as one of the best decks, and you have Lugia here and there seeing play. It was nerfed in this format finally. Thankfully. In fact, that's part of why the format is better, is because Lugia is bad. And then you have the 2023 decks. You have Gardevoir at one of its highest power levels it's ever been at. Gardevoir in this format is very strong. You have Charizard Pidgeot, which is very fun. It always felt like 2023 Worlds was very cool, but not having Charizard Pidgeot around felt weird. So having Charizard Pidgeot, very cool. I like that about Paradox Rift. You have Miraidon in this format as well. You have Chen Pao in this format, and then you also have the new Paradox Pokemon. You have the Roaring Moon, which is the mascot I chose for this picture, which was a pretty good deck. And then you also have the future Pokemon with Iron Hand seeing play in Miraidon decks and in Chen Pao decks. And you have Iron Valiant seeing play with Entei as like a turbo aggro donk deck, right? So this format has lots of different playstyles, stage 2s, stage 1s, basics, all of that seeing play. It's fun to play, but also the games do feel a little sacky just because decks are so aggressive, so reliant on getting turn 1s that are good, and if you just don't get turn 1 sometimes you just kind of lose, which is a point against it. But I do enjoy BST Pair. It's my favorite format from Scarlet and Violet so far. Then we have 2024 Worlds. This one took a nosedive, which is a shame because throughout 2024 there was actually a couple of good formats. I like the Prismatic format a little more, and I also like the format before Worlds. We had to Twilight Masquerade, where Gardevoir with Unfair Stamp was like the best deck, and Dragapult was good, and Blissey was good. You had these decks based around, you know, slow Monkey Dory strats. And then 2024 Worlds releases Dusknoir, and it releases, you get the, the Night Stretcher and Dusknoir, and you get Pheasantipede. So suddenly, hand disruption like Unfair Stamp becomes completely unplayable, and the meta is entirely made up of pretty much just aggro decks. You have Regidrago V-Star, which is super aggressive, run you off the board kind of deck, and it gets the Kyurem from the set, which allows it to kill 3 Pokemon at once. So its goal is just to turn 2, like a deck against, like a Gardevoir for instance, its turn 2 is just going to wipe your board and then you lose. You get Miraidon, which is super fast. It's just gonna turn 1, try to take a knockout and win with like Iron Hands. You have Iron Thorns, which won Worlds, and it won Worlds, well, because of some mishaps and Jorkin, and it also won Worlds because all of these decks that are just designed around playing as many cards as possible don't do so well against a deck that locks their abilities, which only plays 4 Pokemon and plays a bunch of disruption cards. This format just felt like the worst format of 2024. It's a shame that it's our Worlds format for this year. I'm going to own the Worlds decks, but I would never go back to play this format other than just the Worlds decks, which I'll own because I'm getting bought them for Christmas, so exciting stuff. Prismatic was a little bit better. This format released Badoo, which put a huge cap. You'd be surprised how much Badoo really did when it came out, because the format prior to Badoo, which was Stellar Crown and Surging Sparks, those formats were also super unplayable. I was playing in them, but I was playing decks that just win on turn 2. Things like Tropico's Dusknoir, I launch 3 or 4 Dusknoirs on turn 2 and attack into my opponent, and they lose the game because they have like 1 Pokemon in play that's terrible. That was kind of the vibe for the whole year, was just popping off with these ridiculous decks. Turn 2 Regidrago, clear your opponent's board. So then Badoo came around and made Gardevoir top tier and Dragapult top tier again. You get this complete shift away to kind of what 2025 looked like. And then, now I know it says 2025. This format started in 2020, or really early 2025, I believe, before rotation. So you still have the V-Stars around, but the format is so much slower than the entire 2024 like second half of the year, based around these decks popping off and winning. Essentially, the format was Yu-Gi-Oh! For most of 2024, because just every game was over in 2 turns. 2025, Prismatic comes out, releases Badoo, and Badoo just checks a lot of these decks that played like 30 item cards. You can't pop 4 Dusknoirs on turn 2 if your opponent item locks you, and you're punished for playing a deck that does that if your opponent does Badoo you. So ultimately, I think this format, I don't know if I want to rank it C tier, because like, I don't enjoy it as much as the 2025 formats, but like, it's definitely better than, like, I'll put it in C tier. Like, it's definitely better than like all of the formats here, because playing Gardevoir versus Dragapult in this format is very fun and skillful. All the fast decks having like their wheels just chopped off felt really good. It was fun to play at the time. Maybe if it got worked with more, it would be less fun. Then we have 2025 Worlds. That is, of course, our very recent format. Gardevoir and Dragapult in 2025 continued to be dominant decks. But 2025 also saw Goldango pop onto the scene. I made this icon before Worlds, so I chose Dragapult Dusknoir because I thought that was going to win the World Championships. It got pretty close, to be fair. Did get second, but Goldango popped onto the scene for 2025 Worlds and was one of the surprise good decks. Gardevoir is pretty much considered by all players to be the best deck of this metagame, but I think that Dragapult Dusknoir would, without Gardevoir around, be like a tier 0 Hitler deck. So I was okay with Gardevoir being around. I did not play Gardevoir during this format. I was playing Grimmsnarl, I was playing Miraidon, and I really enjoy playing against Goldango, so I wasn't that mad about Goldango getting hugely buffed. So, like, this format was pretty fun. Like, I don't want to rank alongside BST pair. When I first started playing the format, I would rank along BST pair, but as the format progressed, people got relied more on sacking people, playing more aggressive disruption, just to try to like turn one sack people with really annoying plays. So like I'll put it down in B tier, but I would play 2025 Worlds again, and I will be building a full 9-deck gauntlet for it someday. GLC competitive is F, because the competitive format of GLC is really bad, but GLC casually is like probably like C tier. I'm gonna put it in C tier just as casual GLC. I think if you play GLC competitively, like trying to optimize the decks, the format's really unfun to play. You have things like the colorless deck entirely made of basics, dragon deck entirely made of basics, and it feels like, you know, things are quickly being power crept in the format, way faster than it should be for single prizers. When I made this image, Blastoise was still good, Charizard was still good, Venusaur is still good. All of these cards have been power crept out of the format completely. Since I made this, you know, tier list like 2 years ago, every single one of the cards that I used to represent the 3 types of starters in this image has been power crept out, which is really funny to think about. Venusaur finally got power crept by Meganium, but Grass has been like pretty bad for a while from what I understand, because it's just very honest deck that evolves its Pokemon, unlike Colorless and Dragon. And also Psychic is broken in GLC. Psychic has been like the best type for like the last like 4 years. And they banned a card in Psychic and didn't change anything because Psychic still just got all the best guys. So, there you go. Expanded is a complicated format because Expanded's, you know, got like 30 different, you know, periods of it. But current Expanded is absolutely F tier. Ever since 2019, Expanded's been pretty bad. Double Dragon Energy with tag teams, not a good idea. Going into 2021, like I was still enjoying some of the metagames, especially Chilling Reign. Shadow Rider was fun, Blissey was fun, things like that. Double Dragon with Tina Chomp felt fine. ADP Zacian with Double Dragon was very strong and gross, but balanced. And then Evolving Skies released ADP Dragonite, which was a guaranteed 3-turn win every single game deck. And from then on, I just didn't enjoy Expanded. Like, it was just me playing fun, silly rogue decks because the actual metagame based around it's Double Dragon Energy, the format. And since Regidrago has come out, it has continued to be Double Dragon Energy, the format, because Double Dragon Energy is the strongest special energy card ever printed. So any dragon that can use it will use it. Regidrago V-Star has been like the best deck in Expanded though for like 4 years. Holy moly. 3 years. 3 years. I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 years now has been the best deck in Expanded, and it'll probably continue to be the best deck in Expanded until they just print like 500 HP Pokemon that's statted out of being good. Eternal, I have nothing to say. This is a weird format that's like has like 300 cards on a ban list. It's trying to play a balanced unlimited format. I think it's a fool's errand to try to make a balanced unlimited format, and you should just not play the unlimited format, which you shouldn't play this either. I have not played Unlimited, to be fair. I shouldn't rank it in F tier because I haven't played it, but Unlimited is unplayable in Pokemon. Just having all the cards available turns out not balanced at all. So just don't play Unlimited, don't play any cards, any formats with all the cards legal other than Cube. Anyway, that's my tier list, going over things. I wanted to redo it. Obviously, I still haven't played every single format. I'll never get around to playing Base Rocket, Base Gym, but now that I've played a lot of Gen 2 formats, I wanted to update my tier list with things like E-Card, things like Rocketon, Base Neo, stuff like that that I've gotten to play since the last time I made one of these that I didn't get to do last time. Thank you all for staying tuned for this, for the second channel, this like probably 2-hour long rant of me just talking about formats that I like and dislike. Maybe someday I'll redo this with adding like, you know, the random mid-season ones I've played like 3 or 4 games of but don't really have much of an opinion on. Next time I do this, I'd like to have Neo SK ranked. Anyway, bye-bye.